So I know I said that I was going to do part 2 of my mid-year book review, but then I realised the amount of effort it would take to go and find all of those books, and I suppose at some point I will hopefully find those and do that. But in the meantime, something that completely nobody ever asked for at all, Midnight Sun. Now I'm sure that all 0.02 of you who are my audience are going, why are we talking about Twilight? Is that not Twilight? Yeah, it is basically Twilight. Oh hell no, I don't like Twilight. That's not what I asked for. That's not what I want. No thank you. And to that I would say probably fair enough. I mean, you know, I'm just a little dictator on here on this platform and I'm just doing my own stance. And yeah, I'm a fan. Fight me. I'm gonna review this because I feel like it, because I like it, not necessarily because I think there's any market for this out there at all. So, for those who do not know, who live under that cultural rock, this is Twilight, and this is Midnight Sun. What is this sorcery? Why is there still Twilight coming out in 2020? Twilight is the original, which is also a part of the whole series. Twilight is not the only one in that whole set, and I'll say more on that in a minute. And Twilight also is a set of movies, obviously, and then Midnight Sun, the purpose of Midnight Sun is to be exactly the same story as Twilight, but told from the perspective of Edward, from the male perspective, from the male gaze. Midnight Sun originally was begun many years ago. I don't know exactly how many years ago because that would require research, and I don't do research before I give my opinions on the internet because why would I do that? Stephanie Meyer started writing the first couple of draft chapters for it, and then something went amiss and somehow they got leaked, and she basically went, screw you, I'm never going to finish this, oh my god, not okay with that, very upset. And so she just threw up those leaked documents onto her site and said that's it, that's all they're ever going to be. And at the time I went and found them on her site and I read them and I went, oh my god, I love this, god damn. I mean, I don't read fiction very much at all, but this is better than the original, I feel. This suits me much better than the original does. And I really wish more than any other story ever that this could be a thing. And I sort of went, well, you know, it's heartbreaking, but that's all of that we're ever going to get. And, you know, it's just a shame that that great concept is probably never going to be a full thing. Fast forward to 2020, where apparently anything is possible. And I was just walking along in the city there, and at the very corner of my eye, I saw the cover in a glass front bookstore, and I had no idea, because I obviously don't keep up on Twilight news, because I figured it's pretty much done, is it not? And no, it's not. The first that I knew of it went straight from being heartbroken several years ago to there it is in my hands. And I rushed in and I bought it straight away. And I have no shame about it, to be quite honest. Now that I have explained to you vaguely what Midnight Sun is supposed to be and why it's here and that it's here, the very first pressing thing is probably to go on a slight general Twilight tangent, which is probably because I can hear most of you, all 0.2% of you, going, well, why do you even like it in the first place? And this is a conversation I've had not many times, but several times, well before Midnight Sun ever became a thing, in the few instances in which I have actually admitted to liking series such as this. Two main points I have with this, and that people have with me over it. The first being that it's just so unrealistic, or some variation of that. Honestly, it doesn't strike me as unrealistic in the sense that, I mean, if it's perfectly socially acceptable for people to go and see movies about mutant ninja turtles and trucks that are sentient robots, then I don't think it's that unusual that there are people out there who enjoy stories about finding love, getting rich, living forever, and having superpowers. Like, those are things that we all, you know, living forever sounds pretty good, I think. I mean, most people have at least thought about it, or at least one of those things to some extent. So I'm not going to belittle you for enjoying your sentient robots and your strange turtles, and maybe you could potentially not belittle me for enjoying, you know, this. The second point being that generally someone will say something along the lines of, don't you realise how problematic Twilight is? Does it seem likely that a person who overthinks as much as I do, who reads as much as I do, would not have ever noticed or considered themes or things that are going on in the text at all? I mean, maybe you really do not have that much faith in my character, but I have actually given it thought, and maybe it's just an excuse or a coping mechanism, I don't know. I mean, you could just say let people enjoy things, and that works just as well as an explanation, but I think for me, maybe the reason that comes up so often is because I think a lot of people are only looking at Twilight on its own, and it's important to remember that there's actually several other books in that series. And I think what says it best for me is if you look at the cover of Breaking Dawn, I think that's the last one. It has that picture of the queen chess piece. And I love that symbolism. Maybe it's very obvious to everybody else, but I mean, way back when I first got into them, it wasn't that obvious to me right away. I never really thought twice about why that was the cover, except for the fact that it just looked very nice next to all the other covers. Thinking about the queen chess piece is very interesting, because I just finished reading another book, and in that book, which is a non-fiction book about that sort of period of time where there were a bunch of really prominent queens in history, and then that all kind of died out again. Things like Elizabeth Tudor, Mary Queen of Scots, Catherine de Medici, Isabella of Castile, all kinds of really prominent female leadership at that point in time. And it was interesting because they pointed out, chess has been around for a long time, and I'm by no means an expert on chess because, as I said, I don't do my research before I give my opinions on the internet because, duh. Chess has been around for so long, and you would assume that, if anything, a game like that, invented at a time like that, would not position the queen piece as being quite so good. I mean, it can move in every direction. It's one of the most flexible and powerful pieces that you can have in chess. And it represents, a figure that typically was supposed to be almost symbolic or just visual, really, like not the true power in the pair. So what I love about Breaking Dawn and the whole concept of this is that, yeah, Bella does come off as a little bit plain and a little bit boring, and yeah, she doesn't have a lot of oomph and a lot of say, and she's not influencing the events very much, and she doesn't have much more power other than to go along with whatever happens to her and with whatever the other people do. That's the point, I think, that there was intention there. The intention was that she's supposed to start out fairly low or plain or ordinary and powerless, and thereby fairly useless compared to everybody else around her. Because without that point A to compare to the point B at which she ends up, then you don't have any character development. And yeah, it can be frustrating, but there are a lot of frustrating characters out there. Harry Potter is a fantastic example because I love Harry Potter as a world-building exercise and can't stand the character himself. And I get it, he's a child. He makes questionable choices all the time because he's like 12 or something. But it doesn't make it any less frustrating for me. And, there's always characters doing things that you think are silly. I mean, that's just subjective. Everyone's going to find some things that characters do frustrating. So Bella is supposed to make that transition from being the least important piece to the most important piece in that theoretical final battle as such. Spoiler alert, if that's necessary for something that's existed for 10 years or so. Let's not think too hard about that. And maybe one of the other third aspect to the Twilight hate, before I move on from talking about it, is that I think there's just generally, there's a reason why Mutant Ninja Turtles and sentient robots pass without any real comment, and they're just cool by default, and things like, hot vampire guys and being rich and having adventures and living forever are considered frivolous or silly. I think that's just because if you look at anything that's inherently not masculine in terms of media, so anything that's a game that girls might enjoy primarily, or a story or a book or a movie, or even a colour, things that are typically more female targeted, they just inherently are seen as slightly inferior. And I think we have to do a lot more work to stop ourselves from automatically going, oh, it's terrible. Oh, it's just bad. Oh, it's just tacky. Because ironically, one of the most commonly sort of dismissed genre or like demographics, anything designed for teenage girls, that's the thing that's going to get the most flack. Like the boy band thing and the, whatever it is they're into these days, I don't know. Despite that, it actually tends to represent one of the biggest markets. There was a book I read, In Defense of the Princess, which I thought I would not necessarily be very convinced by, and I need to find it because that would be part of the review that I was supposed to be doing right now. And inadvertently, in the process of talking about this, I've talked about 2 of the other books from that list. So maybe this is a sort of a spiritual part too. In that book, In Defense of the Princess, I love that one so much I will do a thing on it in its own right as well. Anyway, it talks about how things that are just inherently designed for younger women especially, they'll just automatically be dismissed. And yet, if you look at the sales of things like that, they tend to be surprisingly robust. Animal Crossing is a great example of that. It's one of the most successful series, especially now that New Horizons is out there. The numbers on that are significant. Obviously, I can't give you quotes of numbers because numbers are too difficult. Got no guns, and it's not something that people ever treated that seriously in the past, and it's become huge. The ability to give some space and let people enjoy some of this, let people like some things. You get a lot of additional details, which honestly I was fairly ambivalent about. I'm not like a mega fan, so I don't remember whole quotes or really minute details or anything like that, but I think that some fans really did appreciate so hearing the names of the titles of the books on her shelf, or the titles of the CDs and the songs that are listened to, etc. So little details like that are very prominent. There's lots of those, and I know that some people really appreciate that. Definitely think that the car chase scene is just wow. That's really interesting. So in terms of it being a book that's talking about, it's the same plot across both books. So obviously the Challenge of Midnight Sun is to give us some things that we are really fresh and that we didn't get in the original. And the car chase scene is just, I love that. It's so surprising. I mean, sorry to Stephanie Meyer for having apparently doubted her, but I guess I was just very surprised that she had the ability to craft such a complicated and technical sort of car. It's a fast and furious scene. There's no other way to describe it, and that's not just a joke. It's just, wow. It's intense, and it's so convoluted as well. And I like that. It's the sort of scene that I can't imagine would come up in any other book, which is cool. It's weird, and it gets almost a little bit silly, but it's nice. So basically you've got like Alice reading the immediate futures of all of the turns and the speeds and everything that need to be taken. You've got Edward reading those immediate futures from her mind as they're happening, but also looking through the minds of several of the others as they look out the sides of the car, because of course at some point he's knocked the rear view mirrors off, so he needs to see through their eyes to become extra mirrors. And you've also got Jasper using his thing to get them all into this hyper concentration unified mode, and it's then they have to like get away from the police, so they orchestrate this thing and they end up throwing the car back into the traffic, so all of that human life is so precious thing kind of goes out the window very briefly there. And they go into great depth about all of the kinds of the models of the bikes and the cars and everything they're looking at. And really no detail is spared in terms of doing the Fast and Furious scene in this, and I think that's great. I would say bear in mind that the first half is very slow to get to any kind of really new content or anything exciting like that. You do get flashbacks as well. You get direct flashbacks to primarily learning, Edward learning to be the vegetarian, and also Edward going off to be the sort of the good murderer or whatever, you know, the justified murderer. So you get those as well. I'm not particularly here nor there about having flashbacks that much. There's a little bit of foreshadowing put through there, or whether foreshadowing is the right word at this point, I don't know. Mentioning how Jacob can smell that something isn't, the smell of Bella is off after she's been near vampires, and his little growth spurt, obviously. There's also sort of overly pointing out the symbolism in the pomegranate seeds, and that's mentioned more than once, which I personally prefer they had not done because it was a little too much. Like, I mean, I prefer it if they don't refer to the thing on the cover at all and you actually get to do a little bit of working out yourself, but minor. Things that seem a little bit different for me that stand out is Rosalie's hatred is so much more prominent in this one, I swear, and I think that despite having a whole new avenue through which to try and convince me, some of the reservations I have from the original one definitely still remain. I can't really relate to wanting to wait at all, so I don't understand that, and I don't really understand Rosalie's position very well, but I'm personally in the position of never wanting children, so I suppose that would be difficult for me to relate to. They really, I don't know, almost overly lean on Rosalie's hatred to drive that whole sort of train of thought. It just doesn't look quite as logical as to why they do so much waiting. There's not as much internal thoughts from Edward about it being dishonourable or whatever it is he calls it, as there is so much of Rosalie just going bananas. And in addition to that, I also can't understand Rosalie's just outright anger about the whole situation quite so much. I mean, it's just, I don't understand why she cares so much. Like, they can uproot and move, and if the girl's dead, she's dead, and the whole thing's over anyway. Like, I don't really understand that. And then there was this insinuation that she was a little bit jealous because he and her never really, you know, he never showed any interest in her, and her whole thing had been that, well, you know, he's never shown interest in anyone, so no big deal, and then now he's into this, you know, lumpy human. So I don't know, I guess, but I think that for me, the amount of time that Rosalie gets in this and the amount of influence that she's having in this, given that I still don't feel convinced about any of that, that's still the same for me. One of the things that I thought was really cool, hadn't really thought about, is getting to be privy to that conversation where Carlisle calls the Quileute, I have no idea if that's right or not, the tribal elders, he calls them up and sort of pre-warns them that they're going to come back to Forks when they originally arrive back there, and the thought process from the elders, you know, felt like it felt constantly to me that the few, and they're very minimal, any of those mentions of Billy Black's like internal thoughts about it all feel very overdone to me. They don't, he seems a little overly worried about it. I mean, maybe it's fair enough as a reaction, but it did feel like a slight overreaction to me, given that they have the treaty and they're clearly not rampaging around murdering people left, right and centre, or you'd know about it in the news. I thought that was a little bit strange, but I really loved getting to hear that little extra bit of perspective.